Welcome to the University of Michigan Dentistry Podcast Series, promoting oral health care worldwide.
This is Dr. Robert Ricketts. I'm interviewing today Dr. Arthur Lewis, Dr. Arthur B. Lewis. First of all, I would like to thank very much Dr. McNamara and the University of Michigan for their facilities here and this opportunity. I think it is a marvelous opportunity, particularly for orthodontists, dentists of the future, to have a facility like this and have a recording like this. I think it's rather sad in the past that we never had the opportunity to see older people, notable leaders in the profession, have them recorded for posterity. So we have been doing this now for a number of years, dating back, I guess, to the first time was in 1974 with Brody and Steiner. At that time, we had a large meeting, and that little interview lasted, I think, about an hour and a half, if I'm not mistaken. And it wasn't very long after that until Brody had his problems, and I guess that was next to the last time that he ever had a talk. So we are very grateful to the University of Michigan, and we just want to sit back now and take advantage of the years of wisdom that you have in our profession.
Yeah.
I kind of look at you as not maybe one of the old guard, but maybe one of the intermediate guards. Certainly you're in an era slightly ahead of me, and I think we can draw on your experience, and it will be a benefit to a lot of people. I think we met at the University of Illinois. I started in 1947, and you preceded me there. And what do you recall of the meeting in 1948 of the alumni? Do you remember that meeting?
Yeah, sure. Because I was there. Well, I've been to all of them. The thing I remember more than anything else was the lineup of the recently ex-students that were in your class. You and McGonigal and Kincaid and the guy Wood, Przansky, Rogie, and you say Aaron Schaefer was in that class.
Yeah.
Is that all?
No, Doug Walder.
Doug Walters. All right, Doug Walder.
And Eddie Wong he didn't finish.
Who?
Wong.
Well, I never knew him.
Well,
so,
he didn't finish with us.
So he wasn't in the lineup anyway.
He wasn't.
And at that time, all of you agreed to, after you were around 10 years, that each of you were going to give $50,000 to the Alumni Association.
That never happened.
But I never heard about it anymore. Just that one day.
I remember that. Yeah.
Go ahead, Rick.
Well, I remember at that meeting our class had the responsibility of teaching Downs analysis to the alumni.
Well, to some of the alumni, put it that way.
Most of the alumni. You were a little bit versed in it, but most of the alumni that came back had never used saphometric.
Well,
in 48.
Well, yeah, because I had just gotten into it myself.
Yeah.
But with my long association with Holly Broadbent.
Yeah.
Speaking of the Downs analysis, I think Bill Downs was one of the most amiable individuals I ever knew in my life. Of course, Bill didn't start to teach until my year at Illinois.
Is that right?
And then he taught us technique, which you remember consisted of filing, and filing. So that It was a matter of Bill going on from there, and if you remember, he ended up professor of the department, but he also introduced the Downs analysis. Of course, using his own material from there was a school west.
Mooseheart.
Yeah, Mooseheart.
Brody used that too. The
Yeah,
Mooseheart was a home where
Yeah.
they had control.
A home for boys that was
Mhm.
subsidized by the Moose Lodge
That's right.
of America.
Hmm.
But you know, one of Bill's biggest problems, Rick, I don't know whether you know it or not, but he attempted to make the ends of the ear rods curved so that they would fit the channel to the ear.
Yeah.
And but he was never successful in that because it was never adopted by anybody else.
Hmm. Well, he was great on trying to use the cephalometer ear rods for
yeah.
chorion. And of course, that's been a problem. Maybe we can get into that a little bit later. Certainly Bill was a marvelous teacher.
Oh,
He used to come in from Aurora,
yeah.
and he would leave there at something like 5 in the morning on the Fridays that it was his day, and he'd come in and have breakfast with us at 7 o'clock, spend the whole day, and he was really a dedicated teacher. Bill always carried a towel in his pocket, if you remember.
Yeah,
And if you,
this business.
yeah, and every time you'd ask him a question, he'd have to procrastinate a little
Yeah.
bit. He'd be cleaning your desk. He would get it out and rub. So this was Bill.
Sure.
He was a marvelous, marvelous man.
Well, I only saw him do that at really at individual context with him.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, because Bill, well, he never had an answer ready. He may have had it ready, but he never wanted to express it
Yeah.
until he was satisfied that that's what is just exactly what he wanted to say.
Yeah.
So this business going around, I only saw that very few times, but that was Bill's trademark. I mean, all you fellows enjoyed telling us about that.
Yeah. Well, Art, getting more personally here, I've always admired your ability to stand up and the backbone you've had and the demand for the truth of something. I think that that's one of the things that stood out in my relationship with you, was that you were always a stickler for the truth. And this interview is not to talk about others, but to really get to know you a little bit better, and that's what we want to keep on. Now, you of course you took the course from Brody. When was the years that you?
Well, I finished in 1935. At that time, the course was just 1 year.
You finished
12 months.
You started in 34 then.
Yeah, started in 34 and finished in 35.
And the course was 12 months.
It was 12 months with, and we had about 3 weeks for vacation in August.
So it was really 11 months.
Well, you might say 11 months at the school, and 12 months
Okay, well,
long.
tell us what a year entailed in education in the 1930s.
Well, of course, we were all from various schools.
How many was in your class?
There were 5 of us. One fella was from Southern California, Fred Angel. You remember him?
Yeah, sure, Fred.
He was a patient of Steiner's, and that's the reason he came to Illinois. And then George Pruitt, whose father was an old Anglo man down in Kentucky. And then Truesdell was the son of Blaine Truesdell from Omaha. He was there. And then we had 2 non-orthodontic sons, you might say. One was oh hell, George.
I can't help you because who was it, Steedy?
She knows.
Was it Sturman?
Yeah, George.
Sturman.
Yeah.
From Connecticut. Isn't he Connecticut?
Yeah, George Sturman's father. No, he was from Detroit here.
Oh.
And of course he was older than what we were.
Mm-hmm.
And then I came from the great state of Ohio. But the three of us, Angel Pruitt and I, palled around together, and of course Sturman had a wife and 2 children with him there, and Henry was he was in a little high water at times because he had been in practice and he wasn't used to doing a lot of things that we had to do. Were you ever in the old school where I was?
Old school, no.
You weren't.
No, I've heard about it.
Well, it was old. It was a real old school, and of course, the orthodontic department was on floor 3.5. Now, the first time I walked in that school, I thought, "My God, what am I getting into here?" Because I came from a fairly moderate dental school. Anyway, I went in the dean's office. That was Dean Noyes. I asked the woman in there, who turned out to be maybe I shouldn't try to recall all these names because
Wasn't best.
No, it was Nell Talbot.
Nell Talbot.
Was in there.
I didn't know
And
her.
she said, I asked her, where could I find Dr. Brody? And she said, he's on 3.5. I said, what? 3.5. So I went over to the old elevator there. They only had one, of course. And I told the old elevator man, who, he was an Armenian or something like that. And he said, where are you going? I said, 3.5. He says, okay. So we went up to 4, and then he said, you get down the steps here, and the 3.5. So that was my introduction to the University of Illinois orthodontic department. The first person I saw, now I better stop using names again because I can't remember her name. I explained to her who I was and so forth, and she said, fine. And about 2 seconds later, Isaac Shire walked in. You remember Shire,
Sure.
of course. And I was introduced to him, and he says, well, you're from Ohio State? I said, yeah, but then you know Kitchen. I thought, yeah, I know Kitchen. Who later turned out to be Wendell, who later was Wendell Kitchen's father, who I know very well. He was a student of ours at Ohio State. And Wendell's father, well, he wasn't exactly, well, he wasn't loved by the students there. But anyway, that was my introduction to the University of Illinois.
Well,
But,
what was your reaction when you first met Brody?
well, my doubts dissipated
Yeah.
right then and there as soon as
you met him.
As soon as I met him. Of course, now, at that time, he was probably, I'm going to guess about,
35?
I was going to say 33, 34, 35,
Mhm.
somewhere along in there.
Mhm.
And then after that, we would go to the Greeks for lunch. Remember
with,
the
with
Greeks?
Brody?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you ate at the Greeks
Sure, of
more than
course.
once.
Sure.
And from there on, why, I was simply sold. And of course, as far as Dr. Brody is concerned, everything I have
Yeah.
is due to him.
Yeah.
To him.
Yeah.
He was a great teacher, he was a great individual, and he was a damn good trout fisherman. Now, I can't, that's about as far as I can go.
Yeah. Tell me, tell us a little bit more about the curriculum. You started out with technique and your anatomy, and give us a little bit of idea of what that year entailed.
Well,
just in a quick
okay.
overview of it.
That year entailed, of course, we started off with osteology in the mornings. Really, it was there were only 5 of us, and it was a 1 year of bull sessions.
Yeah.
Is what it amounted to, Rick. But we started off, and then with anatomy, and before we know it, we were in what you might call orthodontics. Only at that time it was known as orthodontia. Now it's orthodontics.
Brody never got over that. He
No,
called it
I suppose he
orthodontia
did.
all his life.
And my wife can't get over it either. Now she still calls it orthodontia. And then in the afternoon, that took care of the mornings. And then in the afternoon, we started off with in anatomy. And we had, first of all, we had to do a dog's head. We really went back in our anatomy.
Well, I never heard that before.
Well, we did. And then after we had sharpened our skills, you might say, with a scalpel, why then we went into human gross anatomy. And
You got anatomy and
that
anatomy and
took-
anatomy.
we got
then.
anatomy from all sides. Then, of course, a couple afternoons a week we spent with Isaac Shower.
So you got histology,
So
histology,
we got
histology.
histology. And of course, it was all anatomy. And at that time, the course started the 1st of February. And the reason it started then, because 5 years before is the date when Dr. Brody had arrived in Chicago and started the
So
first
that
class.
that made the year whenever he got there.
That made the course start whenever he got
That's
there.
interesting.
Uh,
Now, how soon were you? It took about 3 months to get into
We-
some patients.
Then we started our treatment in July. The latter
July.
part of July we started, and each of us had 5 cases that, of course, had never been touched by anybody. And then we got the cases all strapped up a little bit differently than what everybody does now. We started and banded everything, and then we started off with an 022 by 028 arch wire.
That
Of
was
course, these are all gold.
gold.
You know.
You used the old 247 bracket,
No, we didn't use the
bracket. The old
That's we used the 452 or 457.
452.
452.
Came in later.
Well, that was Steiner's bracket.
Steiner's bracket was 452.
Yeah, that's what we used, and we were the first class to use the Steiner bracket.
Were you?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we used both. In 47, at least I used the old 447 bracket with Brody, and the 452 with Downs.
With Bill. Well, see, all our treatment was under Dr. Brody.
Yeah.
And then we had August off. Then we came back in September, and went from there until the 1st of February.
Well, now, did you get any of your cases completed by the time that you left then?
Well, now wait a minute. I went to Dayton, where I had never lived before, and I started practice. But then once a month, I went back to Chicago and spent 2 days there with my patients.
Oh.
So I finished about 4 of them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one patient moved away from Chicago shortly after the first of the year, and I've forgotten what happened to the other one. But you know, Abe and Ernie Marr were there, and they took the old cases, and which a student didn't finish, and they finished the cases.
Finished it.
Yeah.
Well, I remember I finished quite a few cases like
Yeah,
that. when I
well,
was
you
on
did
the staff.
because you.
Yeah.
It took you longer to get educated, and
Yeah.
you were there a little bit longer than
I was very slow.
the rest of us were.
Yeah. Well, you learned what I later call the old primary edgewise.
Yeah, that's right.
That-
I learned I would call it the angle edgewise arch.
That's right.
Exactly what I learned.
That was
Because if you remember, the edgewise arch, which Dr. Angle brought out about 1926, it wasn't used very much except on the West Coast. And then when Dr. Brody came to Illinois and Bob Strang started in
Bridgeport, wasn't it?
in Bridgeport, then that's when it became noted in the in the East and in the Middle West. So it's
Was Brody still at that time treating Class II Division I's rather rapidly? He wrote a paper in 1928 on the rapid treatment of Class IIs.
yeah. Well,
if
of
you
course,
remember.
it all depends on what you call rapid.
Well, 3 months. That was pretty fast, I would say.
Well,
In the paper, he wrote about 3 months, but by the time that I took the course in '47, we still expected to get our patients treated in 1 year.
well, that's the way Ed Grommy, who was at the Anglo College with Dr. Brody, he expected to treat a Class II Division I in 6 months.
Yeah,
Period time.
yeah.
Well, I never did that. Maybe I just wasn't good enough, or I wasn't fast enough.
Yeah. But I think it's good for the people of the future to know that in those years, a lot of the people that went to Illinois expected to have their cases finished in about a year's time, though.
Yeah, especially a Class II Division I.
Yeah.
Of course, we treat them a little differently than
Yeah.
what they did because
But
they,
at that time, I think it's good for everybody to know that that was the objective, though.
yeah,
Mhm.
just about. Of course, you treat them, you strapped up to both arches, you started off, and when you got bracket control on your lower arch, well, then you started on your Class II elastic.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And with the second order bends.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me, does anybody use second order bends anymore?
No, they dropped out in about 1950.
I haven't heard a person use
No.
even use a word
No, they
in
dropped out.
many years.
They about 1950. Our class used second order bends, but in about 1950, they started using sliding hooks and sliding the teeth down the arch wire.
On the archway. And
And
of course, also about that time, we all started using head caps too.
using headgear.
You want to call it headgear?
I
All
do
right.
because
Okay.
head cap. A neck strap is not a head cap.
No.
So
but we
dropped
started using head cap.
Well, you started with a head cap.
Sure. I
Yeah,
remember.
that's kind of an interesting story.
Because I remember Steenie had to make mine for me,
Yeah, yeah.
in practice.
Yeah, that's
Of
where
course,
we
she didn't have
started.
anything else to do at that time. She only had 3 children, so
We should have Steenie up here too. Maybe we can get it. Maybe we'll get you to come up and say hello a little bit later, Steenie. Well, now, were you always from Ohio? You
Yeah,
have
sure.
were you a
Sure.
farm boy or something?
no, I was a little city boy from Steubenville.
Oh,
Now, if you haven't heard of Steubenville, why, there's really something wrong with you. Because Steubenville used to be it had 2 connotations. One was that it was the dirtiest city in the state. I mean literally dirt,
Really?
because it was right on the river. All we had there were steel mills and coal mines.
Oh my goodness.
And I worked in the steel mills. I worked there for about 6 months while I had my dental degree.
After you got your dental
After
degree.
I got my dental degree, because I graduated in June, and I finally ended up at home in Steubenville about the 1st of August after visiting all my friends and so forth, and I had nothing to do, and so I asked a friend of mine for a job, and he gave me a job over in the steel mill.
What part of the steel mill? I worked in a steel mill too.
Well, this was the worst end of the steel mill, though.
The slag pit?
No, I worked in the galvanizing department.
Oh, that's stinking place.
Yeah, well, I know it is, sure, but I enjoyed it. I was getting a good salary, and also
What was it, 50 cents an hour?
it was 57 cents an hour.
57
I think
cents.
It was.
That's high wages in those years.
Oh, sure, it was high wages, and I even was out. I was out on strike once too. That was when they started the NRA.
Yeah, I remember
I
that.
forgot what
National
that even stands
Recovery
for
Act.
now.
National Recovery Act.
National Recovery Act of Ickes, I think, was
Yeah.
Secretary
Yeah,
of
that's right.
something or other at that time. So we were out 2 weeks, I think, and I took advantage of that I took a trip to, or I went back to Chicago and so forth and so on.
Okay. Now, when you came through, who were the big names in orthodontics in the 1930s, the mid-1930s?
Well,
Who were the big leaders that you remember?
of course, Rick, I really didn't know much about orthodontists at that time. But from the time I started in dental school, I had determined that I wanted to be an orthodontist. I think the name orthodontist really fascinated me.
Yeah.
And that's true,
Yeah.
literally. So through dental school, that's all I
that was
wanted
your
to
goal.
be. And then when I became a senior, then I had to find a place where I was going to be an orthodontist. Well, they were few and far between. There was Illinois, and Northwestern, Iowa, and they were the only schools, I think, that
Had graduate courses.
did postgraduate courses or graduate courses. But so that quite a few of the men at that time who were orthodontists had been students of Dewey, for example. Of course, all the older men were Anglo men, and then there was a school in Kansas City that was operated by a man named Tansey, and he gave, I think, a 6 weeks course.
The Dewey course was only about 3 months, wasn't it?
Dewey course?
Dewey
Well, I
school?
never knew. I decided if I wanted to be an orthodontist, I wanted to be a university-trained
Yeah.
individual. So I never looked into
Dewey was a short course too.
Oh, yeah. They were all short courses, Dewey. But the only orthodontist I knew had been a chap who was in practice, and then took Tansey's course, and then he was an orthodontist. But that was in Steubenville.
Yeah.
So
Well, now you finished in 35.
finished in 35.
As I go back through the literature and as I talk to people of your generation and so forth, it seemed to me that 1936 was a hallmark year. Now, the reason for it was that that's the year that Tweed published his first article on extraction. And it was also the year that Oppenheim came from Vienna.
Yeah.
Now, did you Did you hear Oppenheim?
Yeah. Well, you know
Tell
how
me
he came
about
to
it.
Chicago?
No. I
Well-
want to know. I've never heard this.
In 1935, the year I finished at Illinois, Dr. Brody went to the European Orthodontic Society meeting in Vienna. And of course, he had known about Oppenheim, and he probably met him,
Yeah.
because Oppenheim and Grunberg and one other individual used to come to California and spend some time with Dr. Engel. Of course, they were all students of Engel.
Uh-huh.
Oppenheim,
Oh, yeah.
Grunberg, and well, hell, everybody that minded anything was a student of Engel.
Mm-hmm.
And Dr. Brody took, I think, I can't remember the number, but he took a lot of cases that had been treated at Illinois by the students with all their records.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, all the records at that time consisted of
Models and photographs and intraorals.
models, photographs, intraoral X-rays.
That's right.
Of course, we were using head plates at Illinois
Yeah.
at that time,
Mm-hmm.
but it was just a matter of looking at it
Yeah.
and
Holding it up the line.
holding
yeah.
up, and this is what happened.
We call that eyeballing.
Oh, well, sure. Well, but that's a damn good way to start.
Yeah, yeah.
And Oppenheim was there, of course, in Vienna. That's where he practiced. And he spent some time, or Dr. Brody spent some time with Oppenheim at his office. And he started, at that time, he was using, and probably still used until he died, what I'll call a head cap. You can call it a headgear. But at that time was a head cap. And Dr. Brody was fascinated by it. So when he came back in the fall, he wrote to all the graduates that he had and told them about what he had learned from Oppenheim, and invited us back for him to demonstrate what Oppenheim was doing with his head cap. And of course, that really took over. Now, at that time, taking the course were Beulah Nelson and Jerry Millett from Milwaukee. Well, of course, Beulah Nelson immediately started
Using extraoral traction.
using extraoral traction, and was really the first one. Of course, Cy Klein was in the next class, and he picked everything up right there.
So I was in the class of 36 then.
No, 37.
37.
See, Beulah Nelson
Okay.
and Jerry were in 36.
Okay, they were the only two. They only had two in that class.
That's right. So I have to agree with you that the 36 was I might say, a benchmark in orthodontic
Yeah,
clinical
yeah,
practice.
yeah. Because it seemed to me, though, it was sort of strange that in that same year, Oppenheim came in with his headgear,
Yeah.
with his extraoral traction, with as far as I know in the literature, the first really successful distal movement of upper molars. Up until that time, I think maybe Case in his book showed that it was used to augment anchorage to move the upper molar back. But as far as I know, is there any difference that this is the first time that anybody in history of orthodontics moved a molar with the headgear?
Yeah, as far as I know,
Yeah.
too.
Now, at that same year, we had the other movement going in which a lot of people had grown weary of their protrusive dentures and problems, and with the old angle techniques. And Tweed then started using extraction, and that was, his publication was in 36 also. So here you had the two extremes emerging at that same year.
Did you say he published in 36?
Yeah. It's an angle orthodontist, 1936.
Rick, I can't remember.
Well, I could be wrong, but that's what I remember.
I'll have to take your word for it.
Okay.
Because really, yeah, that's right. Because Dr. Brody and Ed Grummy and
That's right. They wrote a rebuttal.
Murray Barcia
That's right.
wrote a rebuttal.
Right.
Okay, all right.
That's right.
Now I'm back on track. Okay.
That's right.
Because I was thinking 1941, but that's when he came to Chicago
Yeah.
and showed
Yeah.
at the
Well,
component meeting.
Did you hear Oppenheim then?
Yeah. No.
What kind of a man was he?
Well, he was a short, rather stooped individual, very soft-spoken, with a twinkle in his eye, you might say. And I know him then. He was, I have to judge, he was about 70 years old when I know him.
Could we talk a little bit more about him, because he had done his original work on his apes in 1911.
Yeah,
as
that's
I
right.
remember.
Well,
Now,
I think that's about the time he started to practice orthodontics.
right,
he was a student of Angle.
Student of Angle.
Yeah.
Now, if I went back to his original work, which I did, I didn't read his work. I was supposed to read it when I was in school, but there was only one copy, and there were 10 of us students, and it didn't get around to me, and I always thought that someday I'd get to it. So finally, when I did get to California, I got my own copy of Oppenheim's original work.
Yeah. Where did you get the slides?
Well, it was a publication.
Oh, well, you see, he gave a set of his original
Okay, now,
slides to the University of Illinois.
well, this is the reason I'd like to get you into this discussion a little bit, because maybe you can help me with it. I reread and reread that material, and I couldn't see how he could draw the conclusions that he did on the basis of the evidence that he had in his work. And it looked to me like it was a strong case for not intermittent forces, which he later advocated, but for continuous forces. And it seemed to me between 1911 and 1916 that Angle must have gotten a hold of him.
Got the whole of
Oppenheim.
Well, it's probably
And I
true.
think he began to twist Oppenheim a little bit. Now that was my feeling from getting what he did originally and what he later interpreted in 1916 and along that way. At that time,
Well, now, Rick, wait a minute. What were his findings on the animals?
well, he worked on apes,
Yeah.
and he had used a variety of forces, and he concluded intermittent forces.
Intermittent force.
Yeah, because when he put on continuous forces, he found a lot more necrosis. But the problem was he didn't use light continuous forces. He was
No,
using
heavy.
heavy continuous
Yeah.
forces. So the argument should not have been a continuous versus intermittent. It should have been something of an abstraction of how much pressure was on the periodontium.
Yeah. Okay.
And this is what always bothered me about that work. But when I was in school, we always referred to Oppenheim's work, and that was our license to use the heavy intermittent forces. And I'm just wondering if at that time what his speculation was in talking with him. Did he talk about the amount of force and all of that at that time?
Rick, I can't remember.
Okay.
I can't remember.
I was hoping you would.
I can't help you.
But well, that's interesting anyway. That in 1936, this sort of dichotomy originated in orthodontics.
Yeah. Of course, they were entirely separate entities.
Yeah.
But okay, let's go on from there.
Okay. Well, now this we've sort of introduced this idea that Tweed and Angle became sort of controversial figures and opposing
Well,
each other.
Well, now, wait a minute now. You mean Tweed and Oppenheim? Or,
Tweed and Brody.
Oh, well, you said Angle. Hell, Angle was dead by then.
No, did I say Angle?
Yeah.
I meant Tweed. And prior to that time, we had Angle and Case, which were
years.
Well, in the 20s. In
Yeah,
the 20s,
they were bitter.
they were bitter.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know about that?
Well, a little bit of it, not probably as much as you do, because you've been a student. You see, I didn't start as young as you did. But anyway, okay, you're talking about Dr. Brody and Charlie Tweed.
Yes. Now
Okay, all right.
They kind of were the next generation
Yeah.
of opponents.
Yes, that's right. All right.
Tell us a little bit about that. You were there when this occurred.
Well, of course, Dr. Brody and Ed Grommy and Murray Bear-Sayer, they were students of Dr. Angle they all finished in 25 or 26. And at that time, Angle, as you well know, was very upset about the people who extracted teeth in their treatment of malocclusions. Of course, he would never give Case any credit. I mean, Dr. Angle would of anything. And I'm quite sure you have Case's book, or if you don't, you should have had.
Oh yes.
Which he showed some marvelous orthodontics, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
So that but Angle really, I think he had the bigger following in the country. And then when Charlie went to the other extreme and advocated extraction, it took, I hadn't been in the practice awfully long, but at the time I started, that was a vow of mine that I wasn't going to take out any teeth. Well, I had to retract just a little bit, and I even did it before I ever heard of Charlie, Dr. Tweed. I had a case where I had two upper second premolars that were completely blocked out of occlusion. And I had started treatment on the lower. It was a class 1 malocclusion with the buccal segments were tipped forward quite a bit, and I had attempted to to move them distally with using the upper arch as with class 3 elastics as my power source, and of course that they brought the upper arch forward quite a bit. The patient, she didn't look too well. So then I decided that I had better remove these two upper second premolars. Then I wouldn't have to use class 2 elastics against my lower. But that's just one case.
Is that your first extraction case?
For my first, yeah. I just simply took out the two teeth. And
second buys?
Upper second buys, and the first molars and the first molars were in contact.
You didn't show it to Brody, though.
No, I didn't show it to Brody. It was just, well, honest. I never thought about showing it to Brody. Maybe I felt differently then.
He did extract, though.
Yeah, well, sure. He had common sense.
Yeah.
But anyway, then shortly after 36, then quite a few people began to go into Tucson. And of course, two of them were Abe Goldstein and Ernie Meyer. And then they interested Bill Downs, and
Sounds
Bill
like
went
that.
down. And Bill, of course, really had more influence on the students than either Ernie or Abe did, because he was in contact with them all the time. And then about 1941, Dr. Tweed and his brother Bill, Hayes Nance, and
Steiner?
Hayes Nance and the nice guy used to be from Colorado.
Shelton?
No, here in Kansas.
What part of Colorado? Denver?
No, he was from just some little town in Colorado.
No.
Oh, you know him if I could just remember his name. Well, hell, you've met him thousands of times.
Oh, I don't know who you're talking about.
Well, he ended up in California, but anyway.
You don't mean Roscoe Tweedy?
Roscoe
Yeah.
Tweedy.
Yeah.
Roscoe
Keating.
Tweedy, yeah.
Yeah.
They came to Chicago and at a Midwestern component meeting.
Nance had an influence on Keating.
Oh, yeah, well, I
Yeah.
guess so,
And
because he was from Colorado.
That's the
too.
lineage of Holdaway.
Yeah, that's right.
Holdaway came that
Yeah,
route.
they all. Anyway, they showed case after case after case, and they took over the whole meeting of 2.5 days, and they showed some, and then Bill Downs and Ernie and Abe showed cases from the school where where they had been tweeted by using what you call the original angle technique, and quite a few of the cases were failures, because well, you know what kind of cases they got at the school. They really got the bottom. And then at that time, a lot of men went to Tucson, and then a lot of us didn't.
That was in 41, you say?
Yeah, that's when he came to the component meeting.
Yeah. Was that meeting in Chicago?
Yeah, that was in Chicago, and we had the meeting in what is known as the new school. No, it isn't the new school now.
No,
it's the old school now.
The old one with the
Right,
tower.
yeah. But I think the men who didn't go to Tucson really started to use a lot of extractions in their cases.
Yeah.
I know I did. Of course, I never got to 90% the way Charlie did at first.
Yeah.
And then he later dropped down. I think the most that I ever extracted, I think, was between 35 and 40%. Now, of course, as you know, that's really dropped down considerably because of the introduction of bonding and the introduction of head caps and everything else. But I think that the biggest thing that Tweed ever showed the profession was that you could really treat cases and well with extraction. And that's, as far as I'm concerned, that was one of the biggest advances in orthodontics.
I thought that Nance was a better craftsman than Tweed.
Well, maybe he was. See, I never knew Nance very well. And Nance didn't get much, he didn't get the publicity that Dr. Tweed did.
Tweed, of course, originated it.
Oh, yeah.
He was the one that really brought extraction. I thought that Tweed's great contribution at that time, at that era, was in the area of diagnosis, however. It wasn't just his technique to take teeth
Well,
out, but he shifted the emphasis of diagnosis away from the molar teeth and into the anterior teeth.
Well, that's
This
especially the lower anterior.
is the lower
Yeah,
central
that's
incisor.
true.
Right.
True. Let me tell you that it had to be during the war. There was a meeting of the Chicago Dental Society, which at that time was really the biggest orthodontic meeting in the country. You're aware of that,
Yeah.
aren't you?
Mhm.
They had by far the best programs.
Yeah.
And the reason I say it had to be during the war because they had the meeting at the Palmer House. Because of the war, the Army had taken over the
old Stevens.
the Stevens Hotel.
Mm-hmm.
I came to Chicago about on a Sunday, and the meeting started Monday, and we met out at the school for just a very short session. I mean, it was informal. It wasn't a meeting. But Bill Downs was there, and he had some cases. But I'll go back. On the way down to the Palmer House that afternoon, Bill said, I've got some cases that I've treated using the Tweed technique. Would you like to see him? I says, yes, I would. Well, he said, I've invited Dr. Tweed to come up to my room about, and he mentioned the time, 4:30 or 5 or 6, something like that. And you just stay there with us. So I went down, and we were there probably about a half an hour, and Bill had laid out about a half a dozen cases. And as you know, they were very well treated, even though he had used Charlie's technique, and but they were beautiful. And about that time, there was a knock at the door, and I forget who came in, somebody, and they had all heard that Tweed was going to be up in Bill's room, see.
You got a room full.
So before long, came another knock. And there was Cope. Now that's
Cope,
Cope, yeah. And after we shook hands and Cope had a drink in his hand, Bill said, take a look at these, will you, Cope? I treated them. And tell me what you think. So Cope went over and he picked up the bottles like we all do. And he said, Bill, they're awfully good, really good. And he used the models with his fingers on the label, to feel where the roots just in the process. But I think these incisors are too far forward. Just a little, not much, but just a little. Bill says, "Oh, what would you do?" Well, he said, this is Cope talking now. He said, "Well, if I were you, I think I'd go in and strap these cases up again and get these incisors farther lingually." And Bill, okay. Well, a couple of minutes later, I knock again, but somebody else knocked. Sam Lewis came in. Bill said, Sam, take a look at these. I want you to look at them and tell me what you do. So Sam went through the same thing, and he said, Bill, these are absolutely wonderful. But I think maybe your lower incisors are a little too far forward. And Bill didn't say anything. Cope said, well, what do you think you ought to do, Sam? Sam replied, well, I think I'd let them alone. I wouldn't do anything. Well, Cope said, I think you ought to go in and retreat these cases. And Sam came back and said, no, I think I just let them stay the way they are. Well, the next person to come in, of course, was Charlie. And he went, Bill says, okay, Charlie, there they are. And he went through them. He turned to Bill and says, Bill, they're absolutely marvelous, wonderful, beautiful cases. They're as good as I've ever seen in my life. Well, it's the old story, see? But the teacher, his adherents, they have to outdo the teacher and so forth. And that's the way it was.
Yeah.
But,
That's
yeah,
interesting.
but that in no way decries what Cope and Sam did, because they both helped the orthodontists of the world, as far as I'm concerned.
Now, you've told us that you went back to Ohio, back to Dayton, and you became a loyal Buckeye, and I see by your tie here that you're pretty proud of your Buckeye heritage.
After all, this is the seal of Ohio State University.
Yes.
And after all, I taught there, not very much, but I taught there 20 years.
Yeah.
So I have to wear that when I come up here, because, you know, you come up to Michigan from Ohio, sometimes you have a little fear in your heart. You weren't always as welcome as I've been here today, but there's quite a rivalry, but we can all stand it.
Okay.
We get by with it.
Okay. Well, I'm sure it comes from mutual respect.
Oh, well, okay.
Let's turn then a little bit to some of your publications, and one of the things that I think is very outstanding, and one of the things I think that gives you a tremendous amount of wisdom, is your experience with the angle orthodontist. So maybe we can turn our attention now to your career with the angle orthodontist, how you got into it. As I remember, Wiley preceded you as the editor.
That's right. Yeah. Well,
and what year was it that you took over as editor? It was after his death?
No, it was before. No, before his death. Well, as I remember now, Rick, for about 4 or 5 years when Wendell was editor, I was an associate editor, but my job was to review articles in other orthodontic journals for the angle orthodontist, which was was really Hal Noyes' idea. That's when I started doing it. When Dr. Noyes was editor, and then after he moved to the West Coast, why he gave up the post as editor, and then Dr. Wendell Wiley went in. And along
was
about
Noyes the first editor? Who was the first editor?
Bob Strang.
Bob Strang.
Bob Strang. They had an editorial board, but Strang did all the work. He was the editor, and then and then Dr. Noyes became editor,
Yeah.
and then Wendell,
and then you.
and wait a minute, you forgot Maury Newcomb in there. Now,
Well, I thought Newcomb was just your assistant.
no.
Okay.
It was at a meeting in St. Louis long about 1951 or 52. Dr. Brody asked Maury Newcomb from Cleveland and me to down to his room. He said he had something he wanted to talk with us. So we went down there to the room. Wendell Wiley was there, and what had transpired between Dr. Brody and Dr. Wiley was that Dr. Wiley felt that that he would like to give up the editorship of the Angle Orthodontist. It was in good shape, and Wendell had been asked to go on the American Board of Orthodontics as the secretary. At that time, the American Board of Orthodontics isn't like, or wasn't like it is now. You really have to work to get your American Board. Prior to the time Wendell went on the board, it was it was an old boy association. You know, you're a good guy and so forth, and you've been around, and
You're one of the group.
you're one of the groups. So then you got your American Board certificate without having to do anything for it. And at that meeting, I took the American Board examination. The examination consisted of showing cases and then having an oral interview with the board. And when I was questioned on my thesis by the board, I realized that they had no idea what the hell I was talking about. And so I welcomed the idea of Wendell going on the board because it didn't have the reputation then that it does now. So
Wendell did a lot for that. Then.
well, he sure did. But of course, prior to that time, why, this was at the meeting in Dr. Brody's room with Wendell.
When was this?
Either the 51 or 52.
Okay.
I don't remember, one of the two.
All right.
And so after Dr. Brody said that we would like you two to take over the editorship of the Angle Orthodontist as co-editors.
Okay.
And I looked at Maury, and he looked at me, and we just said, okay, all right, we'll give us a day to think it over.
Yeah.
So which we did. So Dr. Newcomb and I were co-editors. Then about after 2 years, which they were rather hard going for Maury and me because we had no experience in this job at all. And also there were some members of the Angle Society who were not helping like they should. And Maury got discouraged, and he said, he felt that that since we were doing all the work, and in his opinion, we were not getting much help from the other members, that he was just going to
Back off.
he would resign. He'd back off. So then they asked me, and I felt somebody had to do it, so then I took it over.
You were the little red hen.
I was a little red hand or a little Joe Shump or something like that.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's when I took over the job as editorship of the Anglo Orthodontist.
How do you look at the Anglo Orthodontist in light of history now, and what do you think its main function is?
Well, I think the main function of the Anglo Orthodontist is to act as a medium for principally, I'll use the word research in quotations, pertaining to orthodontics. Of course, you know the Anglo Orthodontist is the oldest orthodontic journal in the world.
No, I didn't know that.
Oh, sure. See, the Anglo Orthodontist was started in 1930.
I knew that.
By the Anglo Society. But what is now the American
Journal.
The American Journal, which of course,
It was.
is not owned by the American Orthodontic Society.
I didn't know that.
Oh no.
Mosby owns it, huh?
That's owned by Mosby, or at least it was. I can't speak for the last 3 or 4 years, but that was known as the International Journal of Orthodontia, and then the International Journal of Orthodontia and Oral Surgery, the International Journal of Orthodontia and Pathology, and I forget what else. But that's owned by Mosby.
I didn't know that.
So that's.
Then they make a profit on it.
Well, sure they make a profit on it. What the hell?
Yeah. That's.
They've got a built-in membership of probably 15,000.
Yeah.
Right off the bat.
Yeah. Well, I remember the struggles that went on with the Anglo Orthodontist, particularly with you and Cy. He used to keep the extra journals in his garage or something.
No, he used to keep them in the basement of the Irvin Zulke building in Appleton.
Yeah.
And then later he got so many that he had to move them upstairs. And now I guess John has them still.
Yeah.
Is looking after them.
Is he?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's rather unique in the history of a profession.
But
have people who are dedicated like that.
as you well know, Cy was business manager from I think somewhere in the late 30s.
Yeah.
Until he gave it up.
Yeah.
Well, I'll say 6 or 7 years ago, maybe 8, and then John took over.
Well, I remember when I was a student, we all felt that the Anglo Orthodontist was really the journal in orthodontics.
Well, sure, that's right. Of course, it
And-
still is.
Yeah, and that it was
Don't
more
tell Graber that, though.
more. There's more of an honor to publish in the Anglo Orthodontist than any other journal.
Yeah, sure.
And I think the same was true of the way that Europeans looked at the Anglo Orthodontist.
That's right.
They felt that it was really the arm of what was really taking place on the inside of orthodontics in this country.
Well, that's one reason why you see so many papers in the Anglo Orthodontist from Europe,
Yeah,
especially from Europe.
yeah.
That's right. It's just a continuation of that process.
Okay, now I want to ask you a little bit more about this, but I saw an article of yours that you published in the Anglo Orthodontist in 1950. We had dinner last night, and you apparently forgot about it. But anyway, this was an article that you had mentioned the work of Downs and Wiley, their analyses, and also some of the things that had gone on with Tweed, who had used broad vents. You said in your article that you felt that Tweed had used cephalometrics to sort of reinforce his views, that it proved his theories. Do you remember writing that?
Rick, for the life of me, I can't remember that. No.
Well,
That's only been 37 years ago, but that's still, I can remember other things in 1950, but
well,
I can't remember that
you
at
can't.
all.
Well,
No.
but you also at that time mentioned that extraoral traction had come in now, and you felt that this was going to change the influence of extraction.
Well, if that's the way the author thought at that time, then it's still true.
It's good. It was.
Yeah, sure.
You were a good sage at that time.
Well, okay.
Now, here you are now. You're sitting here in Dayton, and you're
I'm in Ann Arbor.
No,
Michigan.
I'm this scenario now.
Oh, okay.
I'm looking at
All
your
right.
life. You know, this is your life.
My
you
life.
see.
All
Okay.
right.
And you're working with the angle orthodontist, and there's a guy Garn that came in. Tell us about
Stanley?
Tell us about your relation with Stan, because you published with him a couple articles, and tell us about how you got tied up with him, and tell us a little bit about Fells.
Well, the Fells Institute, which now has been taken over by the Wright School of Medicine,
Was this guy Fells? Is that Fells naphtha?
Fells naphtha soap
Yeah.
that your
Okay.
mother and your grandmother used to use to wash clothes.
That's right. I remember Fells naphtha.
Yeah. Well, Samuel Fells gave, he organized a fund, which of course was all his money, to establish an institution of research in child development. That's as near as what I could give you.
Is that located in Dayton?
No, that's located in Yellow Springs, Ohio, which is about 25 miles away from Dayton.
Okay.
And this was started in 1930.
Mm-hmm.
And it started with they selected some youngsters from around in Yellow Springs who became the nucleus of a group that now that has numbered, I think, nearly 700.
Mm-hmm.
And after they picked the original group, then you had to be born into the Fells Society or the Fells group. That is, the mothers were studied before the child was born, and then they continued on for many, many years.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a longitudinal study, just the same way that the
Broadbent series and
Broadbent
Denver group. And
the group in Denver, and I guess that's
about it.
about it.
Burlington series maybe up in
Yes,
Toronto.
but I don't think they
Mm-hmm.
haven't going as long. But
Are those records still available and well kept?
some of the records are still available. In fact, as we just are getting a paper together now on the late growth of the face.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we have a group of 20, 12 girls and 8 boys, on whom we have records up to age 50, longitudinal records. Not every year, but so. And we have learned, just like others have, I think, that the face doesn't stop growing anywhere at the ages that they formerly were thought. In fact, it used to be that all growth ceased at 18, and then maybe some of them would go to 20 and so forth. But now we know that isn't the case. But somewhere in the 30s, at the middle to the late 30s, the growth in the cranial base and in the mandible comes to an end. There, of course, the of the patient still lives and so forth, but we don't have any records after 50. But we do know that there's an apex of growth, and then it just plateaus. In some instances, it decreases. Of course, that's I'm sure an error in the records, no doubt about that. But that's the. Let's get back to Stanley now.
Okay.
Stanley is. He came to Fells. I'd say about 45, maybe 46, 43, 48, somewhere along in there. And he took over as head of the physical growth department at the Fells. Now Stanley he's still active, is a physical anthropologist. And he had a smattering of dentistry because of his affiliation with Forsyth in Boston. So after he came to Fells, we started accumulating dental casts, and which later developed into quite a number.
Well, had you started working with Fells before that?
Oh yeah, I started to work
How did you
at Fells in 30. How did I start? Well, I belonged to a luncheon club, like most people in a town of like the size of Dayton. They have lunch, and they'll have a speaker. And
Rotary Club or
the same idea.
Uh-huh.
No, it wasn't a Rotary Club.
Knife and Fork Club?
Yeah, a Knife and Fork Club. They had a speaker there from who was the director of Fells, and I just couldn't wait to get to talk with him after I heard him speak. So I went over and said I'd like to become affiliate. He says, well, we don't have any money for you. I said, okay, I don't want to be paid. I just want to be able to come and use your records in any way I can. So that's the way I started. So now I still go, even though it's now the Wright State School of Medicine, but I started in the 39. And then, of course, they started taking head place in about 30. They were, to the people then, they weren't very important. But as soon as I started to go over, then I got them interested in but trying to take good heads that you can use.
Take them right.
And then after many years after, why they got a head holder, and they're much better now. But they've stopped taking records about 10 years ago. So that's the end of it.
You published an article or garn in the Anglo-Orthodontist on statistics in 1958.
I published that. I asked Stanley to do it. And I might say he very reluctantly agreed to do it because, well, he thought that it was just a little bit beneath his stature. And maybe it was. But anyway, at that time, what orthodontic group or what orthodontists really used statistics? They used them, but they didn't understand them, and most of them were incorrect. So whether Stanley liked it or not, and whether he still does, that's the way it happened.
Then a little bit later, then you did a paper with him where you studied asymmetries of the teeth. Could you tell us a little bit about that? You remember that work that you did?
I remember. Yeah, there were, of course, the asymmetries principally.
It was mostly tooth mass.
Involved, tooth size. Mesiodistally, and then we went on from there to to non-formation of upper and lower third molars, which, of course, those records principally came from my office, which we found that about 13% of my patients were missing one or more third molars. Teeth, and I gave a paper on that in Denver.
That fits pretty well with 16% that Bjork found.
All of them.
They're all in that
the Hellman and I forget who else. I mean, Bjork has done a lot. On that. Well, there've been a dozen.
Was that pretty consistent with what other people found?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Now, if I remember rightly in that article, you had something to say that it seemed as though nature kind of averaged out. If you had a bigger tooth in one place, it'd be compensated along the line until it was a pretty good idea that all the teeth should be able to fit together in general.
Well, yes, sure. That's the way they should be, but in a lot of cases they don't. And of course, there are also asymmetries from one side to the other too. But really, the asymmetries in tooth size aren't they aren't very large in most cases. Most cases.
That's true. I think that's important because a lot of people. How does that fit with the Bolton analysis today? In your mind, in your use, how do you think it adds up?
Well, I haven't used the Bolton analysis now for probably 20 years. So
it came out in the 50s.
It came out in the 50s. You should have some kind of a good idea what your tooth sizes are, and I mean, if you, in the case of an extraction, in the case that you're interested in, you might want to take one premolar over the other. You might, and also in the cases where there are peg laterals or in addition. I mean, one on one upper jaw on one side you'll have a missing lateral, on the other you'll have a peg lateral. So what are you going to do? But you have to. Those cases, Rick, they all go down to what you're going to do on one case for that one individual. And after all we're treating is one patient. That's the guy in the chair. That's right. The rest of them.
That's right. The decision has to be made with regard to that.
You have to forget about it.
Right. Now it seems though long about then. In the early 70s, you became interested in the cranial base.
Yeah.
And you worked with a person by the name of Roach or Roach or Roach?
Alec Roach.
Alec Roach.
Yeah.
Tell us about him a little bit and your work with him.
Well, Alec...
Was he with Feld?
He was, yeah. He was an Australian and also a physical anthropologist and a physician. And when Stanley left to come up here to Ann Arbor at the Center for, well, I've forgotten the entire name, the Bob Moyer's group that Gorn's there, Bob gave Stanley such an offer that he just couldn't resist. So then they came up here to Ann Arbor. And of course, we haven't done any work together for many years. But to get back to Alec came and took Stanley's position at Fells, and since then we have gone, you might say, more into cephalometrics than we did with Stanley.
Why did you get interested in the cranial base at that time?
Why?
What led you to that?
Well, there's one thing. There were a lot of papers about the cranial base. Tick Brody wrote a paper on that, and the Bjork has written, and a few others. And we simply wanted to get a paper that our material would allow us to use.
Now, you were talking about spurts of growth.
Well, now, yeah, but then after that, then we got interested in the cranial base as far as spurts were concerned, and spurts in the mandible. And as far as I know, I may be wrong on this, but I think our paper on the it was written. We had
74.
Yeah, well, that was the one on girls, and then about a year later we had one on boys, and then we combined the figures on both of them. That showed that beyond any doubt, there were things that were spurts in growth. Now, Dr. Brody would never agree to that, you know.
I didn't know that.
Oh, no, Steve. He said because his material, which of course only went from the 3rd month to the 8th year, didn't show any spurts. And he just couldn't accept it, that there were spurts. But they are in both boys and girls, and it's related to the peak height, the velocity.
Yeah.
It's related to skeletal age, and so forth. But boys and girls really, they're different a little bit, but
now you you were measuring the cranial-based triangle. You were using Bayesian.
Bayesian, yeah.
And you went from Sella to Nasion, Sella to Bayesian, and then you went along the Bayesian-Nasion plane.
The triangle, that's right.
Yeah. It was interesting to me that later, of course, we discovered that was a golden section.
Yeah. Your work.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. We later found that out. But early in my prediction, I was using 9/10 of a millimeter per year, and if you remember, I was very interested in your material at that time because you found 0.93 millimeters a year, plus or minus
You remember
0.8.
that a hell of a lot better than I do. So.
Yeah, and this was very consistent with what I was using in the predictions at that time. So I was interested when you published that material first that it was I used that to support my own argument. Maybe that's the reason I remembered it. Now then a few years later you did a work on the saddle angle.
Yeah, saddle angle. Yeah.
You found that it was from birth to. Where did you get your material from birth to age 2?
From the Fells sample.
I'd forgotten that you had that early material.
Fells sample. Yeah.
You got.
I can't remember very much.
You got hip plates on newborns?
Yes, on newborns. Quite a few.
And you found that as growth took place, then that it was more flattened, and then it went like this.
Well, I can't remember what we found, Rick.
Well, that's what you
I
found.
just forgot. I can't remember.
Well, that's what you found.
Okay.
And now the reason I'm interested in this is because I've pretty much dropped Sella altogether.
Well, Sella has always been a problem. I mean, you pick it and I pick it. They don't always agree.
That's right. Well, that's one thing, even if we could agree on it. But of course, I got very discouraged with Sella when I started to try to predict from it, and I finally abandoned it.
Well, there's Harry Israel has several papers on Fell's material, not Fell's children, but the people there, principally around Yellow Springs, where he has got records in the 20s, and then later, and has shown an increase in the size of Sella.
Oh yeah.
And they're principally in the American Journal of the Physical Anthropology, and so is Tall Green somewhere in the Scandinavian countries.
Tallgren.
Yeah.
Angie
Tallgren.
Tallgren, yeah.
And Tallgren.
Yeah. Hmm. Well, that was the thing that interested me there, because Brody had done it, and I got interested in the cranial base when we originally did our work on cleft palates. And I had 6 cases with an obtuse cranial base with cleft palate speech with no cleft palate. And we found out that it was
cleft palate speech with no cleft palate.
No cleft palate, and it was not a submucous cleft. And the reason for it was that the basion and the whole clivus was displaced upward and backward in an obtuse cranial base. It was as if this bend never took place that we see in newborns.
Yeah, well,
So I had 6 of those.
Yeah, okay.
And
but you're going back to the paper by Ortiz
no.
and Brody?
No. I'm just going back to 53
to
my material, because you see I was using mid-sagittal lamina grafts.
Yeah.
So I was circumventing any problems and whether or not you were picking your anatomy correctly. Okay. And so I've been interested in the cranial base, and it's more important as you remember the work of Solo.
Benny, yeah, sure.
And I often in my courses will talk about the 4 Solo principles that came out, where he didn't feel that the mid-sagittal cranial base had much to do with the predetermination of jaw relationship. He couldn't find in '66 when he published that article that, and I'm wondering how that fits with what your studies reveal.
Well, I can't recall enough about what Solo wrote Rick. All I know is that there is such a thing as stability to the cranial base, and there's also such a thing as growth in the cranial base, which doesn't cease until somewhere in the middle to late 30s.
Yeah. Would you object to a line basion nasion as a serial superpositioning device?
Well, it doesn't make any difference what line you're going to use.
I think it does.
You think it does?
Yeah.
Well, of course, I know you like the line down through the fissure.
But I like. We also came to use the facial axis, which and we were led to that. It wasn't anything I invented. It was just where we were led.
You used it.
But I'm just wondering what your reaction to it is, after having done the work on the cranial base the way you did for 10 years.
Well,
I'm putting you on the spot.
I know you're putting me on the spot, and what I'm trying to
what you're trying to squirm out.
What I'm trying to get out is what I can remember about what we found, and also what we wrote. I mean, after all, I'm not 65 anymore.
Okay.
And,
okay.
I can't remember all these things.
Well, now, with your experience with the angle orthodontist,
All right. Okay.
You've had some real outstanding people that you've worked with, and what are some of the real original articles you think that maybe have led to the direction that orthodontics has taken in your experience? What are some of the great articles, the great people, the great personalities that you've met through that experience, at least?
Yeah, sure. We've had articles by some people that whose findings are different from the usual procedures. We've also had some papers You want me to move something, Jim?
I don't want you not to move something.
I want you to stay still.
Oh, okay, all right. Some of the, we've had some papers by some men in the Scandinavian countries who I think were, and I've forgotten some of their names now, because, see, I haven't been editor now for pretty close to 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, but if you want to ask me what, if you want to include papers that that I think have been outstanding, I'm going to have to say that quite a few of them have been yours. And you're sitting here, and I haven't received any payment yet for these, for what I'm going to say. But,
I wasn't
really,
fishing for anything like that.
I know you weren't, but damn it, that's the truth. And let's go back to the paper by Stanley. I mean, I think that has on the statistics.
Yeah.
Now that has influenced more than what he ever thought.
Mm-hmm.
As many people as he ever thought.
Yeah.
Because it does.
Yeah.
I mean, now, if you don't know the principles and sometimes the fallacies of statistics, you don't know what you're reading.
You can't read the literature.
No, you can't.
And if you can't read it, you can't really evaluate it.
You can't evaluate it, and you can make any kind of terms that you want to pick up, and who's going to deny you the facts of the case. But really, we had 2 or 3 papers by this chap, Ultimus, from Howard University in Washington. And I always remember his. They were without a doubt the cleanest papers I ever received when I was editor. They were...
Did you tell him that?
Typed immaculately, yes, I did, on a couple of occasions. His tables were always precise.
Publishable as they were
Published
received.
as they were, very well conceived. And it's a writer like that who really makes an editor's job rather easy at times.
Now, Steenie helped you with reading some of those.
Steenie,
Tell us a little bit about Steenie.
Oh, that's my wife, as you know. Well, Steenie, during the time
She's sitting out here in the audience, so you got to be careful.
But anything that was published in the Anglo Orthodontist while I was editor was read by my wife. And anything that was in there. I mean, she read it from the time we first got the paper. I would go over it, and I would put some commas in there. I'd get it back from her. They were all erased. And then she would read all the proofs just as well as I did, and I think we did a pretty damn good job.
It's hard work. Anybody who hasn't done it, that's hard work.
The printer made more mistakes than what we ever did, I'll tell you right now. With all due respect to Van Roy, I don't know whether he's still living or not, I don't know. But really, if I hadn't had Steenie, it would have been a terrible job. Really would.
Well, tell us what the mechanics. You receive a manuscript from somebody.
Well,
what is the process that you go through for the students out here who are going to publish a paper someday? What advice can you give them?
Well, first of all, I think that there's a certain form that you should go through. Number one is that why are you writing the paper? What do you want to find out? And then you have to show what you used as your material, and then what did your material show you? What are your results? And then you can go and discuss what you have from your results, and then you end up by a summary in which then you summarize what you think your resuls show.
And your conclusions.
Well, the summary
And
the
conclusion.
conclusion
All
is the same. There's no difference.
Well, now, the mechanics, then, you receive a paper from,
Yeah, okay.
from a student or from a clinician or somebody.
We receive a paper.
And you acknowledge that you got it.
That's you acknowledge it. You send them a letter sooner or later that
Okay.
you got the
And
paper.
now what do you do with that? You have a list of those that you have in readiness to publish.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Who
But-
evaluates that now?
Well, first of all, as far as I'm concerned, you have to evaluate that.
Okay, you're
the
the
editor has to.
Editor is the one that does the picking and choosing then.
Well, if he has some questions about whether it's worth publishing or not, then he's free to send that to one of maybe a dozen people, and they could either concur or not.
Well, it's a pretty sticky thing then
Well,
sometimes.
it is sometimes sticky, and but you, if you have an editorial board, you have to obey
Mhm.
what their wishes are. You can't. I would say, very seldom did I override anybody. If I would send you a paper to the judge, and you would write back and advise that it just isn't worth publishing, well then I wouldn't publish it.
Okay.
But really, you see, the Anglo orthodontist is a little different. We never had to satisfy anybody.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't have to
You
publish
you
your
never had
paper.
any advertisements either.
No, there'd never been advertisement in the Anglo orthodontist, so that we had nobody over our heads putting just a little bit of heat on you to take it. Really. And
Well,
that's one nice thing about it. But
right.
if I get a paper from somebody that I had questions about it, I can remember one that I got from a chap somewhere in the East. I sent the paper to Dan Subtolny, and Dan wrote back and said as much as what he knew about the paper. He gave me a background on the fellow and what his experiences were, and I just said, that's it.
Yeah.
And no publication.
Well, there's always been this, how much the editor actually alters the paper. And you've tried to let the original material speak for itself rather than...
We tried to let the paper speak for itself in the manner at which it was written. Now sometimes we go from one extreme to the other. Sometimes you get the papers principally from a foreign country, which you would literally have to rewrite. I mean, use the results and so forth, but you have to rewrite the paper. And then on the other extreme, when we have one of our papers, well, that was right just the way it was written, you see.
Yeah.
But because everybody, any author is different from the fellow next door.
That's right.
He's got to be, and you can't form your opinion from what somebody else has found
Now,
or they do.
You've been in a position then to watch the flow of the entire profession. Pretty much with the nature of the papers coming in, What have you noticed now from in your career, maybe going all the way back to the 30s? What are the transitions that you've seen take place in orthodontics and the theories and the practice both together?
Well, now you're talking about the results, or the,
Well, I'm talking about just
or
ideas.
the papers themselves.
The papers
Well,
themselves.
first of all, the papers themselves, Rick.
Abstracting the general trends. What do you think?
Well, I think that number one, they're far shorter than what they used to be.
Shorter papers.
Shorter papers.
The
than what
papers
they
got
used to be.
shorter.
Yes, I think they are.
More concise. Less theory, less discussion.
Well, of course, back in the real old ages, they always had a commentator or a reviewer, and they published his.
Well, it seems to me as though
words,
we had this in meetings. If I go back to the old, well, let's take the old journal, even before the turn of the century. The what was it? You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I want to. You're talking about the comments that were from the floor.
That's right. They were all put in there.
Something in there, and sometimes they were better than the paper.
Yeah, yeah. Well, even the Angle orthodontist, I remember in long 1960. I was critiqued by Thoreau and by Brodie both, and these were published.
Yeah.
We don't seem to have enough of that anymore. Do you think?
No, I don't think there is. For example, at our component meeting last month, we had a paper which I won't go into the title or anything else, but we had a paper that was good, covered the field, and then we had a paper, then the same paper was discussed by a man of a comparable efficiency and education to the author, and he took another side of the story, almost directly opposite to the paper, the original paper, and you could take either one that you wanted, but in your opinion, one was right and the other was wrong, and but I doubt if either of those will ever be published.
Mm-hmm.
I know if the first one is, I certainly hope that the discussor's paper is read.
Okay. What do you think now? We're getting ready to wind up here. As I asked you a minute ago, you've been in a position to see trends take place. I usually look at trends as a ground movement. Anything that's a fad is coming usually from a single individual or coming from the top. But when you see a trend, you see an overall movement taking place in the profession. You mentioned you were trained in original edgewise, then we saw extraoral traction came in, then we've seen lighter forces and breaking up the arches with some of the things that I've done. And now we've got reposturing and functional movements taking place in the profession. How do these things strike you, and on the basis of your experience, can you be a little bit of a sayer here and tell us what you think, where we're going?
Well, that's a story in itself, Rick. Of course, everything is different now than what it was when I started, and it's well, I don't know. That's inevitable. But I see a trend towards a removable technique that is being used by a lot of people, I've had no experience with that. What I think about it, it doesn't amount to a roll of beans, because if somebody can show me good results, favorable results that are going to stay, then that's the way to treat a case, or that case. So, for example, I'm sure that that with bonding and with I'll use your head cap assembly, that it has reduced the amount of extractions, which I think is favorable, and that's good. As far as some treatments where it's principally expansion, you have to hold those cases, I think, for a long time before I'll use the word settle in, which of course covers a multitude of sins. Incidentally, that always used to get Bill Adams riled up. What do you mean by settled in? Because he's just like you, an old Indiana boy.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah.
Well, that can include 1,001 things. And also, Rick, when is the case finished?
Never.
Never finished.
Never.
Look,
Never.
now, for example, she might not like it, but I treated Steenie as the second case I ever started in
That's how
private
you
practice.
Was you married at the time?
No. Hell
Oh,
no,
that's how you got your
yeah.
wife. You treated her
Well,
teeth.
Well,
You knew whether she was sound or not then. Huh?
She's all right. But now I did something on her that I think that on the lower right side I moved the buccal segments back just a little bit. But if you looked in her mouth, you would see that those lower incisors were just about set in cement, which so that maybe I'm getting off the subject
Well,
now.
we've just got a few minutes. I just want to tell you that certainly you haven't done anything in this 2-hour period that has changed my opinion about you in the beginning. I do think we can take a great deal from your wisdom. I've always admired you, as I said, for your backbone and ability to stand up and defend your ideas. I think orthodontics as a profession owes you a great deal of gratitude and your contribution with the journal, with the teaching. I know that the one time that I was in Ohio lecturing, I suppose this was about 15 years ago, you insisted that we look at patients in long range. And I went back and focused on that. And our long range forecast today, in my lectures, I will always give you credit for stimulating me along that line when we went up to my room after that meeting, and I think it was a meeting in your honor at Ohio State. And yes, it was. Yes, it was.
All right.
And so whether you know it or not, you've had a remarkable influence in your contributions. I think it's something that we can all look forward to with a great deal of love, and one that you can take a great deal of pride in. Thank you very much.
Well, Rick, thanks a lot. I think you're a little effusive about
No, I'm not
what
at all.
I've done. But I'll tell you one thing. I would do the same thing now, beginning in 87, as I would in 35. It's been a wonderful life, an enjoyable life, and I don't think there's anything better than orthodontics. I'll tell you right now.
It's wonderful.
I would do it all over again. And thank you.
Thank you.
Now, let's get on with the Ricketts.
Okay. Okay. Well, that will conclude our interview here. And again, thank you very much, and thank you, Steenie, for taking such good care of him all these years. Thank you for all the work you've done, too.
Listening to a presentation from the University of Michigan School of Dentistry, which is dedicated to supporting open learning and open educational resources. This recording is licensed under the Creative Commons. It may be reused and redistributed for nonprofit use. Please attribute materials to the University of Michigan School of Dentistry and redistribute under this same license. For more information on how this and other University of Michigan School of Dentistry recordings may be used, visit www.dent.umich.edu/license.